Hey there! If you've managed to find this video, welcome to the channel, but you're currently watching part 6 of a multi-part review. You can find the first part through the card or the link in the description. After that big distraction, we get back on track to the main story and make our way to Mount Gagazet, home of the Ronso people, and it's not long before we run into them. Kelk is among them and refuses to let our band of traitors through. Thankfully, with Yuna expressing her resolve to fight Sin despite the people being against her, and Lulu calling out Kelk for also turning his back on Bavel, he lets the party pass. However, there are two specific Ronso that have a problem with this, and it's the same pair from Luca, and as I'm writing this, I can't help but wonder why I didn't just reveal their names in part 2 to make referencing them easier on myself. Anyways, they are Biran and Yunki, two extremely well-respected warriors, and they refuse to let Kimahri through specifically, only allowing him to go through if he can prove his strength. Having had enough of these two bozos' senseless bullying, Kimahri kills himself right in front of the pair, and with the pointless sacrifice of a beloved friend, the group collectively decides to give up on the pilgrimage, turning themselves over to Bavel to pay for their crimes. Meanwhile, in the canon timeline, we have a mini-boss against Biran and Yunki. In this fight, you only have access to Kimahri, and if you try attacking one of them, the other will take the hit while significantly reducing the damage dealt. The only good way to deal damage is to either use an overdrive, obviously not the most reliable source of damage, or wait for one of them to use bulldoze, separating the two and leaving them open to attacks. Anyways, I actually just lied about overdrives being an unreliable damage source because these two have a ton of potential skills you can learn. So you can realistically open with an overdrive, use Lancet, and activate overdrive again, and repeat until you run out of spells to learn. Now, you might be wondering why the hell these two have beef with Kimahri in the first place. Well, if you talk to a certain NPC, he'll explain that 10 years ago, Biran beat Kimahri in a fight, but Kimahri refused to admit defeat, which led to Biran breaking his horn in anger, an incredibly shameful thing for the Ronso people, which caused Kimahri to leave the mountain in shame. After defeating the pair and earning Biran's respect, not only is Kimahri allowed to pass, but they promise to stop anyone pursuing the group, which he hopes is enough to make up for breaking Kimahri's home. Horn! With a proper sense of security, we begin to make our way through the mountain, and holy shit, I gotta highlight Gagazet's theme, Servants of the Mountain. I love the vibe it gives off. With this area being a sacred location to the Ronso, it has this majestic sound to it, and yet, it has this underlying dark tone as well, befitting the dark fate of summoners who fail this far into their pilgrimage, with no hope of anyone sending them into the far plane. Anyways, I think that's enough gushing over this song. Let's talk about what there is to find in this area. In this alcove here, you can find one of the spears left by Braska's party, and the concept of this one is just him reaffirming to Yuna that no matter how she chooses to live her life, she will always have his full support. Meanwhile, Jek and Orin fuck around in the background, I guess. Owaka's shop is here as well, and with a new item, holy water. And I highly recommend you make like a Belmont and stock the fuck up on these things, because nearly every upcoming boss practically requires you to have a few of these on hand, and you won't be seeing any shops at this point for a while. But I should address the fact that Owaka's shop has a distinct lack of Owaka. This is because since he offered his services in Bavel right before Seymour's rematch, he got arrested for helping traders, so his brother is taking charge of the business for now. And I kid you not, his name is Wants. As the group passes through the mountain, Riku and Yoshi muse over the fact that they still haven't figured out an alternate way to defeat Sin, despite how close they've gotten to Zanarkand. Thankfully, Yoshi lightens up the mood by bringing up the fact that going to Zanarkand may help with this issue. However, this doesn't last long, as Seymour has caught up with the group, and judging by the fact that Riku only noticed him after Yoshi moved out of the way, was standing at the perfect position and distance that he and his flashy haircut was completely blocked by Yoshi. Anyway, Seymour attempts to once again convince you to join him by doing the same thing he did in Bavel. Oh, but this time, he does this while also mentioning how effortlessly he took out the Ronso attempting to stop him. Okay. And implies that he knows what happened to Jack, and that joining him will free him. Okay, that's actually somewhat convincing. Yoshi, on the other hand, has had enough of Seymour's bullshit and attempts to pull off Kimahri's stunt, only for him to dramatically reveal his new super augmented body for yet another Seymour boss fight. And this one might as well be a formality because this fight follows the same formula as his last encounter. Still has the mortar body absorbing health off him when it dies, still has the talk trigger command, and still sets up combos with status effects, except instead of purification, he inflicts the zombie status on a party member and attempts to kill them by casting full life afterwards. And the only way to remove this status is by using holy water to restore the character's humanity. Even though logically it should finish the job. I will mention how funny it is to cleanse the zombie debuff and watch Seymour helplessly attempt to cast a ray spell on a living party member like a fucking fool. The only thing worth mentioning is Cross Cleave, an AoE skill that deals a stupid amount of damage unless mitigated by Protect. Or by using Mighty Guard with M.I.R.A.I, which I ended up opening nearly every boss fight with to make setup much more convenient, since the effect applies to all active party members. Supposedly there's something about annihilation with the mortar body, but that sounded game-ending, so I put all the stops and assaulted him before he had the chance. With Seymour yet again defeated, Yuna can't help but think about his comment on Jecht, and tries to get answers out of Orin, and when he responds with silence, she asks the person who won't keep withholding information, leading our hero to reveal to everyone the truth he learned all the way back in Luca, that Sin is Jecht, leaving Yuna and Lulu shocked that he would still fight Sin knowing it's his father, while Wakka tries to write it off due to the toxin, realizing that if it was true, then his brother was killed by a legendary guardian. Well, with that heavy news, surely nothing strange is going to happen right after. So yeah. Right around the corner is this crater filled to the brim with faith, and this giant swirl of energy in the center. What's even stranger is after Yoshi touches one of these faith, he blacks out and we find out that he's going insane. Oh no, not because he's suddenly seeing visions of his home, but because this lunatic has his clothes dryer in the fucking kitchen! But this sequence does actually have some important details. First off, we have Bahamut's faith. He reveals that Sin actually wasn't the one who destroyed Zanarkand 1,000 years ago. The true culprit was Bavel, who was fighting a war with Zanarkand. They end up being the ones who used Machina weaponry to overpower Zanarkand summoners and lay waste to their home. Now, you might be thinking, that can't be right. We saw Sin destroy Zanarkand in the game's prologue. How could Bavel be responsible? Well, after the destruction of their home, the survivors were willing to do anything to preserve the memory of Zanarkand, so they all became Faith and created a dream Zanarkand, along with all the people who lived there. And this leads to the other revelation. Both Yoshi and Jecht are dreams of the Faith, meaning that there was never any time travel shenanigans to begin with. But due to them being touched by Sin, they've become something more, and this leads to Bahamut believing that they may be the keys to end the Faith's dreaming and finally allow them to rest. Before I move on, I want to highlight this specific line here, when Bahamut refers to the dream as a Zanarkand that never sleeps, recontextualizing a seemingly throwaway line from Yoshi describing the place's lifestyle back in Macalania.
No problem. Zanarkand never sleeps. Never sleeps.
With this exposition dump finished, Yoshi wakes up, deciding to keep the information he just learned to himself. The last area before Zanarkand awaits, the cave system within Mount Gegazet, which is a fairly simple area. There are points where bodies of water force the group to separate as Yoshi, Riku, and Wakka explore and complete a trial of some kind to open a path forward, ultimately making this place not very interesting to talk about. That is until we approach the end of the cave, where Orin warns Yuna that she will send fiends to test our strength, this person being Yunalesca herself. And given the time frame, it's clear she is among the unsent, waiting for strong summoners deep within the ruins of Zanarkand. And as soon as we leave the cave, the party is instantly attacked by one of her fiends, the Sanctuary Keeper. This boss's main gimmick is Photon Wings, an AoE attack that gives a lot of status effects. The most prominent being Curse, which prevents the use of the overdrive gauge. This is the other effect that Holy Water cures. However, unlike all other status effects, this is the only one that affects Aeons, meaning that once they get the effect, it cannot be removed due to items being unusable on them. The Sanctuary Keeper's other big attack to worry about is Mana Breath, dealing stupid high damage to one person in particular, usually killing anyone that isn't Orin or Wakka. Thankfully, if you've prepared enough, this fight will eventually be yours, even with the fucker prolonging the fight by constantly healing itself. And now, we've arrived in Zanarkand, a city dead for 1,000 years in all of its ruined glory, standing between our heroes and the end of their pilgrimage. Desperate for time, Riku attempts to convince Yuna not to go further in, which leads Yuna to comfort Riku, reminding her that she knew her fate from the start, and thanks her for continuing the journey with her. While doing this, she drops a sphere, and after interacting with it, we find out its contents were meant to be seen after she had defeated Sin, and contains her feelings towards her guardians. Except Riku, because it was recorded at Mihin. But it's okay, we got an equivalent scene like 5 seconds ago. The big reveal of this is that we find out that Yuna had been developing feelings for you-know-who around this time. And with that, we make our way down to Zanarkand. Before proceeding too far, the party decides to set up camp and rest, leading us right back to the beginning of the game, featuring the song whose name spoiled the identity of this location and left me no choice but to reveal in the very first part of this fast review that I'm still not over! But, since we're back at the beginning, this also means that this whole storyteller arc is finally over. So, with no story left to tell, it's time for our group to make their way through Zanarkand. This trek through Zanarkand ruins is truly a beautiful moment, the darkness of night covering the ruins whilst also being illuminated by the many fireflies roaming all around. All the while, the majority of what remains is buried underneath the water surrounding the area. It gives this area such a distinct look from the rest of the game. The area's theme is another track that needs mentioning, selling the dark themes of this once great city reduced to nothing more than rubble. It's also the trademark RPG theme that doesn't get interrupted by the standard battle theme. Yeah, I fucking love RPG themes that don't get replaced by a standard battle theme. I want to be engrossed in the emotions the developers want me to feel! Once the group enters the ruins of Zanarkand's Blitzball Stadium, something unexpected happens. They start seeing visions of travelers who've been here before, with Auron explaining that this place is essentially a giant sphere, recording everything going on. One of these visions includes a mysterious woman and an unknown child who could literally be anyone. It's Seymour. It's Seymour as a child. The other visions are of Braska's group, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, as since we're supposed to get an Aeon here, there's a trial to clear before we get it. Zanarkand's trial is kinda neat. Unfortunately, it suffers from some tedious issues with going back and forth over and over, but I believe it's much better than Bavel's. Do you like Tetris? Well, this trial requires you to find Tetris shapes by standing on glowing tiles that show a certain shape afterwards. In order to prevent yourself from blindly checking every tile manually, you can interact with the screen showing you what shapes you need to find, which causes the required tiles to light up, making for a standard but enjoyable memory game. After clearing the first room, you then move on to the second room, where you need to clear 4 different configurations and move the 2 spheres into the slots that appear in the first room. After doing that and ignoring the suspiciously replaced save point, the final part of the trial reveals itself. A boss fight, believe it or not. When attacked, the Spectral Keeper will counterattack the 3 spots directly in front of him. By using the Move Trigger command, you can position the weaker party members out of harm's way, but shoving everyone to the back won't work forever, as he'll eventually start casting Lift Mine, which rigs certain circles to blow up on their next turn. The other main ability of his is Berserk Tail, which turns him towards a party member and attacks them, with a chance of inflicting the Berserk status, causing him to basically do a free attack if he manages to get the status on a particularly fast character. Now, you might have noticed the dirt platforms outside and are wondering what the point of them are. Well, these are Aeon exclusive platforms, as I struggle to see any non-Shiva Aeons to fit on these things without looking silly. After completing the trial set out for us, the chamber containing the 5th of the final Aeon awaits. Yuna enters alone, yet swiftly returns, urging the rest to come see what she has witnessed. The faith has lost its power for a long time, and is nothing more than a statue. But moving forward, we get some good news, alongside some dreadful bad news. The good news is, even with the faith losing its power, Yunalesca is able to bestow the final Aeon to Yuna. The bad news is, one of her guardians has to sacrifice themselves to become the faith of the final summoning. That being said, she says all this with some Seymour equivalent takes regarding death, so I'm not too sure this is such a good idea. As she leaves and awaits Yuna's answer, one final vision of Vraska's party shows. These specific visions are cool to see, not just because of the same reasons as finding their spheres in the overworld, but because before we entered Zanarkand, Auron is reminded of his younger self, and reminisces about how the closer he got to Zanarkand during his last pilgrimage, his resolve started to crumble, and these visions show us exactly what he meant. Auron tried all he could to convince Braska to turn his back, expressing that he doesn't want to see his friend die, that there must be another way, and reminding Braska that the cycle of Sin's rebirth will continue if he goes down this path. But all of them were countered by Braska, stating that Auron knew his death was all but certain, asking if he would prefer if another summoner would go through this, and reminding him that there may be a chance that Sin doesn't come back. In the end, Auron's shade is left alone defeated, as Jecht has volunteered to become the Faith. To quote Auron, he wanted to change the world, but he changed nothing. With the emotional weight of seeing his past get the better of him, Auron flails at his shade, and as it fades away, he bitterly remarks,
"And the cycle went on.
Seeing this, Yoshi is confident that he'll find a way to break the cycle, and offers to question Yunalesca, while reminding the group, and the audience, that this is his story. It'll go the way he wants, or it'll end here. At this point, Yuna steps in to remind him that she's the main character too, and this is as much her story as it is his, and proceeds forward so that they can all get the answers they want. Approaching Yunalesca, Yuna asks if Sin will come back, even if she uses the final summoning to defeat it, leading Yunalesca to reveal how Sin keeps coming back, as when the final Aeon defeats it, that Aeon will become the next Sin, and since Jack became Braska's final Aeon, this is how he is Sin today. She follows this up by expressing her belief that Sin's cycle of rebirth is never ending, and when questioned about humanity atoning for their sins, she counters it by mocking the idea, thinking that humanity will never achieve such purity. She ends this by demanding to know who Yuna has chosen to become the Faith, and while she was more than content to sacrifice her own life for a chance to end the cycle, she refuses to take one of her friends with her, only to perpetuate the cycle. She follows this up by claiming that the final summoning is an outdated practice that should be abolished, that instead of perpetuating the cycle of providing Spira with false hope, she will face Spira's sorrow in a new way. Yunalesca is disappointed with her answer and prepares to fight the party, believing this to be a merciful act. Then Auron drops the hardest line in the entire game.
Now! This is it! Now is the time to choose. Die and be free of pain, or live and fight your sorrow. Now is the time to shape your stories. Your fate is in your hands!
Yunalesca has quite a jump in difficulty compared to the last boss, being a multi-phase encounter. Her initial human form is her least threatening. She mainly counterattacks by placing a status effect on the attacker, and her regular attack does a pitiful amount of damage, with the caveat that it removes any beneficial effect from the target. Drain is the only part of the phase you need to work around, and if you're struggling with an attack dealing around 2,000 health this late into the game, you got bigger problems. Her second phase is where things actually get interesting, as she shatters the ground beneath her to reveal more of the monstrous form within her hair. Here she utilizes Hellfire to inflict zombie onto multiple, if not all, party members, killing them with Kiraga or damaging them over time with Regen if you fail to cleanse the debuff in time. So yeah, it's basically the same as Seymour's last encounter, minus the combo angle, and the benefits for succeeding are greater, so it's not the most dangerous thing in the world. Once her second form is down, she reveals the full extent of her power, revealing a damn Medusa head, and she opens her final phase by casting Megadeath, which instantly killed my entire party. And my last save was right after the Spectral Keeper fight, which is a perfect segue into one of the aspects where this game shows its age. The cutscenes are unskippable, which is pretty annoying when in order to get a second chance at a boss fight, you have to sit around for a while waiting for the cutscene you already watched to finish up, or in my case, multiple cutscenes. You might be lucky and find a few lines you can skip, but if any line has an animation connected to it, you're out of luck. This was super noticeable when I basically had to speedrun my way through the remastered version just to get like 5 seconds of good footage for part 4. Anyways, back to Yunalesca. How are you supposed to dodge Megadeath? Sure, killing her second phase while summoning an Aeon helps, but that doesn't account for any future instances where she may use the spell out of the blue. You see, the trick with Megadeath is that it instantly kills any human party members. It will completely miss if the target is zombified, which kind of feels super clunky to work around, since she still tries to cast healing spells on zombified party members, so you want to cleanse the debuff. But when you cleanse the debuff, it leaves you vulnerable to Megadeath, so you want to be a zombie. You see the issue here? The intended strategy is just one big paradox, and I'm not too sure about intentionally leaving one person zombified. Not just for the reason I already stated, but because you're basically forced to dig into your extremely limited supply of Mega Phoenixes, as well as making sure you swap the zombie party member with someone who won't end up pointlessly sacrificing themselves for no good reason. But that last part is undeniably a skill issue, and I would never make such a foolish mistake. No matter how you decide to deal with this, the fight will eventually be yours. In her final moments, Yunalesca leaves the party with the chilling news that without her, the final Aeon will be permanently unobtainable, leaving Sin effectively immortal. And even if a way to kill Sin was to be found, she states that something she calls Yu Yevon the Immortal will create Sin again. With nothing left to do in Zanarkand, the party makes their way out, but before Yoshi catches up, Auron stops him to reveal his biggest secret. Much like many of their opponents, he too is unsent. Which, to be fair, was hinted at multiple times throughout the story. I brought up Seymour's "Why are you still here?" and Auron claiming he doesn't belong in the far plane, but there are other moments, Like when Yuna resends Jiskel, the camera clearly shows Orin reacting and struggling to cling to the living side, or how Rin reveals to have found him and taken him under his care after suffering some serious wounds, only for Orin to mysteriously disappear the very next day. To quote Rin, an ordinary man would not be able to walk. Now, if you haven't caught on by now, there's a pretty big question to ask. How did Orin die? Well, we actually got to see that moment before fighting Yunalesca. Shortly after defeating Sin, Orin was consumed by grief and came back to Zanarkand in an attempt to avenge his friends. However, he was no match for her and suffered a fatal wound. It was only through sheer force of will that he was able to crawl his way towards Bavel, where he found Kimahri after losing his horn, requesting to take care of Yuna with his dying breath. On the bright side, being dead has left him with a unique opportunity, the ability to ride Sin and travel to the Dream Zanarkand, where he watched over Yoshi. Upon hearing this, he asked the question that's been on his mind for the entire game. Why did it have to be him? Orin claims it's difficult to explain, easier to show. I say bullshit because the reason is really simple. To fulfill his final promise to Jecht, to take care of his son. Immediately after leaving Zanarkand, we see Sin watching the entrance, awaiting the result of the pilgrimage. Yoshi explains the situation and asks for a bit more time because his asshole friend Sinno just stole his Sunside Heights record and he needs to get it back. Thankfully, even as the living embodiment of death, Jecht acknowledges the importance of reclaiming Sonic level records and leaves. As it retreats, Sid's airship arrives to pick up our group, and once inside, they have but one question remaining. What now?